A warm welcome to today's NFDI InfraTalk. It's a pleasure to host the next edition of the talk. And today we welcome two guests from our consortia. In particular, it's Bernhard Seeger, who is a co-spokesperson of the NFDI consortium, NFDI for Biodiversity, and happens to be a professor for computer science. And we are happy to host Marius Dieckmann, also from NFDI for Biodiversity. And what just Bernhard told me, he's more knowledgeable about practical ID matters than the typical professor for computer science. So that's an interesting fact we can share here. I'm also a professor for computer science, so it's very easy for me to do this kind of joke. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Thanks for joining for today. We are live streaming this event, and also we intend to record this session, so it will be able you will be able afterwards to share this link with your partners or to revisit the lecture at a later point of time. Today's talk is about cloud infrastructures for NFDI. And since NFDI contains the letter infrastructure, and more importantly, data infrastructure, of course it is quite interesting to explore what kind of technology can be used for storing, hosting, providing access, and so on. And of course, cloud technology is state of the art with this respect. So I'm really looking forward to your talk. Bernhard and Marius, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jörg. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot for the introduction. Also, I'm standing here with Marius together for a group of people. Actually, it's the task area group 4 of NFDI for Biodiversity is basically responsible for the ideas of a research data commons. So I'm actually only the speaker here of the group, like Marius is doing it. Okay, and I have to say, well, why is it important now also for NFDI? Because it's now also a cross-section topic. And so I'm also looking forward to discuss it with other NFDIs, how we can proceed here with the infrastructure. And I will present basically the basic idea we have about the infrastructure and why it's so important. First of all, where are we coming from? As already mentioned, we are from NFDI for Biodiversity, a consortium in NFDI, which has also a long history, because we have a previous project which helped us a lot to be successful in the application here for NFDI. It's GFBio. I'm basically participating in GFBio from hour 0. And Marius is basically part of the DENBI project, which is also very successful and even more known than GFBio, because they have managed to have a very nice, build up a very nice infrastructure, physical infrastructure for cloud computing. So why is it so, maybe I should first point out the fact that biodiversity seems to be a very isolated topic, but it is not an isolated topic because we have a very close relationship to other topics like medicine, because also if you don't expect maybe, but just think about it, so COVID-19 is a biodiversity problem. Because not only biodiversity is disappearing, but it also shows up and increases. So unfortunately, in that direction, in case of climate change, we have an extinction of species. So we have a loss typically, but also an increase because now basically the animals or the population is moving to the north from mid of Europe, and we receive the species from South Europe. And we have also economical impacts. You have heard or seen the nice pictures from China where people do the pollination now because of the loss of bees and other insects. So that has a clear economical impact, but also clearly the COVID-19 disease has also some effect on our society. Why one NFDI? I have not explained it to you, Jörg, sorry, but maybe to others, it's also a personal view of mine. When I started being a PhD, basically the group I was working on was very isolated, even in computer science. You know, so our bosses was quite concerned when somebody went to the other group on the next floor. But nowadays it's totally different. Even we exchange ideas, and that's very good, with other disciplines, and we are basically doing research together with other disciplines. I actually would think that most of the research problems, really big problems, are multidisciplinary research projects where different disciplines have to join to approach, to develop approaches for the research topic. It's not an isolated working anymore of the medicine department, of the computer science department. It's going together quite a while. And it has also an impact on our society because, as you know, now also of the COVID-19 crisis, we have basically also, it's important to bring the results into society. It's also has a new term comes up, the third mission, beside of research and teaching at the universities, at least, we have the third mission to bring ideas in our society. That's basically also, this basically explains our goals. We want to share research data, but not only data, but also I'm also always saying to my colleagues, we have to also to share our services. And this is not only within the NFDI, but also we have to be open-minded, open in the sense that others can share our services, and other infrastructures may access our services and our data. And we need also some kind of new tools within such an infrastructure, more collaborative tools, which are not available now. So we're using Google technology very often because we need these collaborative tools, but most of us would like to have also different tools which are more going into the direction of really of research. So we need for that a common infrastructure, but also an open infrastructure. We are not building here an isolated island where we cannot transfer our results somewhere else, but we need it. We need also openness. So when we ask the researchers, what are your requirements nowadays, the researchers would immediately say, we want to obey the fair data principles. That's obvious because otherwise the proposal at the DFG is not accepted anymore when you not use the word fair. So it's pretty clear to use this term. This has some implications also for our infrastructure, because what you need is at least the 4 points, which I think are important. It needs unique identifiers somehow. So we want to access the data using unique identifiers. We want to access the services having unique identifiers. We need a metadata description for being interoperable. And clearly, without metadata, it's not probably some human could maybe think what's behind this data. But it's very difficult for machine-to-machine exchange of data to that one machine understands the data without any metadata. It's impossible. So we need common access interfaces, and we need also some kind of versioning. The reuse of data, which is quoted to be the most important thing in the FAIR principles, which is somehow at the end of all the work we did before. All the data was collected, the quality was checked, the metadata is available. But reuse is actually seen as the most important thing. Without a reuse, the data is not worth to archive or to manage. It's important to have a versioning system behind, which is versioning the data, the programs, and the platforms. And overall versioning is very important in such an infrastructure to be reducible also. So reducibility of the results is important, and that's the point we need basically to fulfill somehow. Okay, just give me one point. I just want to comment things also. Okay. Maybe. Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, now it's working, like in my lessons. Okay, now let's go to, I mentioned already, this applies to data and services and other things, which are the research objects of our community. It's not only about data, I just want to say it. Data is important, but not all what we have to address. Okay, now come on. Okay. Okay, now the lines are here, sorry about that. So, but fair is not all what people would like to see. So the point is that when services are running and when services are not running, people complain immediately. So you have noticed last Friday Slack was down. I think many of you have wondered about what is going on here. So this should not happen with NFDI. That is a very hard requirement, but we should go for that. So that we have always available services guarantees, that we have immediate response somehow. Independent of the data volume. It's very difficult to do it, but we try to do it. And we also want robustness by using standardized components. So it's not very good to use components which are half ready. So standardized components are here really one good point. Also, the second point is low cost here. Oh, sorry. Okay, that's basically. Sorry for that. Low cost, which everybody thinks it's money. But sorry, I have to say, money is not our cost measure. It's time of people. So look how many people you can hire to get a position as a programmer, as an IT expert in your group. You will not find anyone today. It's very hard to find someone. So it's time is a cost measure, what we have, because the people we have to manage and maintenance and infrastructure, and also the knowledge behind what people have an experience. So usually a PhD student, when he left or when he leaves your group, the knowledge is gone. So only I can basically take over maybe 10% of 20% of his knowledge. So that's really a really big problem. So what we need here is also to share resources somehow and to do it. And due to sharing of resources, we try to reduce the time we spend for managing overall the infrastructure. And the third point here is trust. It's because nobody would like to exchange data with all people. So we need some kind of user management, access rights, and some kind of logging. Okay, let's see. Okay, and this brings me to the summary of the objectives. So we have to improve the fairness of our research objects. Therefore, we need some kind of development of a common infrastructure where all this functionality is offered somehow to the users. But we also need some technical backbone of the research data commons, which is a multi-cloud infrastructure. And Marius is telling you more about that. I will just give you one slide more to give you, because all these things I told you now was very abstract. So I want to make it more concrete. And last week I had a very nice discussion with people from the Dragonfly community, which is a very small community indeed. But it's typical for what happens with research data in the biodiversity community, because the Dragon community is not an institutional community, but they are citizen science. They're collecting a lot of data. So European-wide, there are about 135 species of dragonflies and 50% are threatened. These dragonflies are very wonderful animals. Everybody likes to flying there around. So there's an emotional relationship from human to this dragonfly somehow. But they also are good indicators for biodiversity. So when dragonflies disappears, you know that the biodiversity might be not in such a good shape as it should be. But also the current situation is not very good in the scientific community of the dragonflies, which is okay, I've written down the Gesellschaft deutschsprachiger Ornithologen, which is basically the association behind it. They have no commonly accepted metadata in Germany. They have no national data portals. They have difficult to reuse monitoring data in recent studies. So you see here one map of a recent study. The black areas are the areas where data was available, and in the other areas, it was not available. So this is really a problem because of loss of standardization and data exchange. That was not the case. So that's the situation here. And we try to address this use case in NFDI for biodiversity and to make this data more available to the public and to provide also service to the community of the dragonfly community, because they are also interested to get access to other data sets which are useful for interpretation what the dragonfly data means to us. No? Okay. So to give you only a very, very concrete use case what we are doing. So next is now Marius. Please take over the presentation. Okay. Okay.
Okay, you should see a presentation now.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. So in order to make or to tackle the challenges Bernhard just told you about, we decided to build an architecture that's called Research Data Commons, and we already introduced this to the broader NFDI community in the section. I think it's now actually called Research Data Commons section. But for those of you who haven't heard of it, this is just a brief reminder on how this works. So basically, on a fundamental level, we have something called cloud storage for us. However, the storage is organized in your organization might be different. But in essence, this is a data pool of all the data that's inside our NFDI. So basically, all the data that's collected somewhere is stored in the central cloud storage, which doesn't mean that it's like located in one data center. There can be multiple data center, but everything has to be pushed down to this layer, because then we can actually provide all different use cases and all different data consumers with the same data without having to resort to measures like asking someone that has their data in a SQL database, hey, can I have your data, or can I have specific access to your data? It's just all the data will be pushed down to the cloud storage, where it will be generally available, although of course protected by AI measures, but in general, all the data can be accessed there if you have the correct access rights. Then there will be a mediation layer where basically all the data that's in the data pool can be transformed into a proper format. So imagine the problem that you have data with different data standards, and that's just stored in the cloud storage. It wouldn't be very useful. So in order to make the data more useful for you and transform it into your desired data format, we offer this mediation layer where basically common transformations for data standards will be applied to the data, and then the data will be merged for your purpose. And then we have this semantic storage layer, which basically is the higher level representation of the raw data that's stored in the cloud storage, that's basically targeted for specific groups and organized in a specific way. So the same data, so depending on the access patterns that you require for your data, data can, for example, be stored in an SQL database, in a relational database, or it's more efficient to hand the data out as raw byte streams. And depending on what you want to do with it, the transformation to do that is basically happening in the semantic storage based on the transformation that's already happening in the mediation layer. And the actual user-oriented services, so the stuff that the actual researchers use, is on top here. So this is the user-oriented services and applications layer. So these are the specific services for individual tasks that you do research for. So for example, there are portals for different use cases. For example, for the use case for the Dragonfly. So there, for example, will be a portal where researchers and the citizen scientists can access and upload their data. There will be tools and applications for analysis and data visualization via a common interface. There will be, of course, a tool for submitting data to the storage or to the research data commons, which includes mainly for us, but also for the community tools for data curation. And it will also provide measures to include data from external data providers. So not everyone will participate. We have to be realistic and use this cloud storage. So not everyone will automatically push the data into our system. So basically, the idea is that we have a proxy connection to these data providers that will be used, or that will be mediated through the mediation layer in terms of like data transformation. So it will be applicable for our internal formats, and then it will be stored in can be stored and cached in the cloud storage. And then the other applications in the semantic storage layer and in the user-oriented service and application layer can use these data from the external data providers as well, and merge data that they collected themselves with data from external data providers in order to do their research, whatever that might be exactly. So some technical details on the core storage. So the core storage is basically the cloud storage implementation that we talked about here in the on the lowest point, like on the fundamental level. Basically, we'll have a common low-level API to store and organize data objects, where a data object is basically everything that can be represented as a byte sequence, and their associated metadata. So basically, this organizes data in metadata in a way that it can be requested together, and that also that can be queried together. So basically, you can query the metadata and see whether a certain data object with a certain set of metadata is available. Although this component is optional and currently only works with JSON-based metadata. The data is stored and retrieved using HTTP calls. So everything are basically HTTP links, and you can, if you have a partner who wants to download a certain set of data objects, you can basically pass them a standard HTTPS link, which they can open in their browser and download the data that they want. So in essence, the core storage is designed for parallel access on large numbers of objects. So I recently tested it. It works for a couple of billion objects. And you can basically parallelly download like tens of thousands of objects with no problems. The objects can be grouped and organized into so-called data sets. So basically, if you have like a data set of Dragonfly observation data, and you say, okay, I will basically do my observations once a month, then I will upload an object with a table of, hey, I found these dragonflies in October 2017, and then I will upload for November 2017, and so on and so forth. So basically, and these can be organized into a single data set, which, for example, is called dataset NRW Dragonfly. And also, object can be grouped into releases. So basically, I can make a snapshot of in a certain point in time that is versioned, and that allows me to basically go back to a certain point of the data set and use this in order to reproduce research that has been done previously. So basically, I can say I did this research with version 1.2.0 of my data set. publish this, and then everyone can go back and see, okay, this is version 1.2.0 of my data set and of the data set, and I can just use this, although maybe newer data sets are available. And I can always see what happened to the data set and have like a provenance of the data set and not only of the individual data objects. It has integration for common AI solutions. So basically, you can include any OIDC connector or any OIDC-based authentication authorization with it. And then the core storage can basically, you can configure the authorization layer of the core storage in order to use the OIDC mappings that you defined. And basically all the components that are inside the core storage are designed to be scalable and support billions of objects, which includes the database, the storage backend, and the backend of the core storage itself, to basically allow any number of objects being stored there and being retrieved in a quite performant way. So basically this whole thing was designed around the idea not to have a single data center where all the data is stored, but to have multiple data centers where data is stored. And this is basically a traditional distributed systems approach, where basically this is what we call NFDI Cloud. So basically our data centers form a cloud that run the core storage with the underlying data, and the core storage exposes its API. And this is done on multiple data centers. And then there's a middleware that's currently in the early design phase, which basically connects these individual data centers in order to retrieve the data for any semantic application, user application, whatever else wants to read data from the core storage. There's also, in addition, the concept of an edge data center. So this is the right data center here, data center 3. There, the idea is that the data center basically already has a local storage application where it manages and hosts data. But in order to connect it to the middleware application and make data access to these not core data centers easy, they can also deploy the core storage with the common API, connect this to the local storage application, and then basically hand out their data via the common API. And this is kind of the important thing, not so much the application under here, the core storage, this can be changed, but the important bit is the API. So if the API always behaves the same, it's easy to access data across multiple stages. And the API is designed in a way to be agnostic of the data type. So basically this API handles every bit of data as a byte stream. And this is true for the data itself as well as the adjacent metadata, with the only exception currently that it can optionally make JSON-based metadata queryable, but that's currently in the development phase. But that's basically the multi-cloud concept. So basically, we have these individual data centers, and we can also have like a NFDI for biodiversity cloud, and then NFDI for, I don't know, microbiota cloud. And then via this middleware, we can connect these individual cloud and core storage deployments and make data accessible across multiple data centers. Some important bits that are part of the multi-cloud concept. So basically, this combination of multiple core storage deployments to allow federal access and integrate edge data centers. This can also be used to do caching. So basically, I can say, okay, I want to analyze this particular data set tomorrow, and this is rather huge, so I don't want to download it on the fly. So basically, I can tell the system, please cache this in our local system tomorrow cache this into our local system, so I have local access to it. For example, do this overnight. You can do load balancing for data analysis. This is more of an idea than it's something that we actually work on, but that's something on the backlog that I want to actually work on. So basically, the data knows in which data center it is. And so we can run the analysis at the data center where the data is actually residing. So we don't have to ship the data across network between different data centers. We have secure authentication and authorized access on all data objects. So if you want to work on your own data in private for the first time, then you can just do that, and the data is protected and authenticated. And you can optionally like open access to your data at a later point when you, for example, do your paper, you have finished your paper on your data, and then you want to publish it. And then you can automatically say, okay, I also want to publish my data and provide a link. Also, the links can be, so for example, I can use like things like DOI to have a link to the data that I used in my paper. Yeah, as I said, this is also suitable for billions of research objects and highly parallel access. So basically, I can download tens of thousands or probably hundreds of thousands of data objects in parallel. It's a decentralized system, and the really important thing is the common API. So if we have this common, or if everyone who uses this common API should be able to link into the middleware and exchange data much more easily than with specific APIs, which makes it easy to share data between various partners. So last slide. So this is back to the Dragonfly's use case. So in our case, we have two citizen scientist groups. So one in North Rhine-Westphalia and one in Bavaria here, and both produce basically Dragonfly observation data. They can now upload their observation data via the web UI, via the portal, into our system, although they both use different formats. So for North Rhine-Westphalia, the group uses format A, Bavaria uses format B. This is stored in a dataset called dataset North Rhine-Westphalia and dataset Bavaria. These datasets store the adjacent data separately, but with the metadata information that this is format B, so the Bavaria format, and this is format A, so the format that North Rhine-Westphalia uses. So now we have a researcher who wants to access the data and wants to compare the Dragonfly communities between different regions in Germany. So basically he says, oh, there are these Dragonfly observation data from North Rhine-Westphalia and Bavaria, and he now can load the data. The system knows that they have different formats, but to the luck of the researcher, someone already wrote a script or little service that actually can transform data from format B into format A or vice versa. So basically, this is in the mediation layer. The mediation layer can tell the researcher, hey, these formats are different, but they actually store the same data. So do you want to merge them? And then the mediation layer will automatically, if someone has already created the program that merges the data for the researcher. But the advantage now is that the researcher can actually use work from other people. So if someone has already done the mediation part, he does not have to do it again, but he can basically use the hopefully shared implementation of someone else. And if not, he can create his own transformation from data format B to data format A or vice versa. And then he can publish his work on the inside the mediation layer. So the next time another researcher comes and wants to do the same thing, he can say, hey, my mediation layer is actually already knows this, and he can use the mediation layer to automatically transform data format B into data format A, for example, merge the data and then use the data with much less hassle than before. Another point that I didn't do here, but what's also important, of course, what you can optionally do is you can actually define how format A and format B should look like, or the producers can actually say, okay, this is our format A, this is our format B. And although not shown here, in theory, you could actually say, okay, our dataset in North Rhine-Westphalia will only accept data in format A, and our Bavarian dataset will only accept data in format B. And so internally, it's already checked at upload optionally if the data is actually conforming to the defined standard, which should drastically reduce the overhead for and exchangeability of data for this community. And of course, this is just a small use case. We have bigger ones, but we don't have time to explain those to you, unfortunately, but that's not possible in half an hour. So what are the current and future of the RDC? So our current work is implementing and testing of the core storage. Then we are also in parallel implementing the metadata search. And there's a project called Fair Data Spaces, which basically is the integration of this RDC concept, and especially the cost storage, into a Gaia X cloud. So basically Gaia X is the project, is a cloud project of a European cloud project that wants to create basically a federated, secure, non-American, non-Chinese cloud, and the project itself is funded by BMBF. And also we have some future work to do. So basically we have to do the implementation of the use cases for the NFDI itself. For example, the Dragonfly's use case that we just presented. And also we introduced the RDC development as a cross-cutting topic in the NFDI. And basically this is the RDC section where this is discussed. And also if people are interested in this work, so just contact us, and we would be happy to have a discussion with you. Also, we are happy to have a discussion with you after this talk, obviously. And another question would be if there are any other use cases beyond NFDI for biodiversity that might be applicable for this RDC concept and the core storage. And with that, I'm finished, and I think I didn't took too long. So thank you for your attention, and yeah, we are open for a discussion now. But thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much to Bernhard and Marius for this talk. And it's time for question now. Please raise your hands or write into the chat W if you want to have a question. Michael, please.
Yeah, just an amendment. Marius is already requesting for more use cases. So there are already more use cases. So at least the ones that we have cross-domain and NFDI for bio, linking with NFDI for Earth, and there will be additional ones with NFDI for agro. Mm-hmm. And recently also one with NFDI for objects. So it's more in order to make this really flying. And I think Marius said, I don't remember, but you might have also mentioned that in addition to Fair DS, the BMBF project, we get also additional funds through microbiota, which started now this month. Beyond Marius, there are already some resources working on this or will be working on this. And I would also like to correct a little mistake. The section common infrastructures is not only the RDC, although it is an important part of this. So that goes a little bit beyond, but certainly, this will be the linking instance, for getting all this together, all the topics together around the RDC. Okay.
All right, thank you. Actually, I would think, given your architecture and this idea of mediating services in between and having a semantic layer that integrates data sets, is it fair to expect that you would be able to host also other data sets and data services? I mean, if this is properly done, then one of the key things to do is to write wrappers or the mediators, whatever you have in your architecture, and then to use this also as a kind of backbone for integration of other services. Is that what you intend to do? And is your architecture able to do that?
Yes. In one word.
That's of course the technical short answer.
Yes, but I can, if you want to, I can elaborate a bit on that. So basically, this idea with the underlying cloud storage and stuff. That's when I thought of this first. This was actually more in the sense of genomics data and like proteomics data. So basically from high sequencing data sets. So basically, I designed this to be completely domain agnostic. So technically, if it's a byte stream, this thing should be able to handle it. And everything that can be represented in the byte stream should be able to be integrated into this system. That's the idea I had behind this thing. And then we just said, okay, we developed this for biodiversity, of course, but the whole intention is to make this as domain agnostic as possible in order to integrate data from different domains. So basically, my idea is that we want to integrate, for example, biodiversity data with data from sociology. So basically, are people happier if they live in a biodiversity rich environment? And then we need to integrate this data somehow, and that's the whole idea behind this storage approach.
Mm-hmm. I pick up a comment from the chat, and this is the comment. Isn't this what GBIF is all about? I think this is the global biodiversity information facility. Yeah. Isn't this a repeated idea here? And maybe you would like to comment on that, because it has been asked twice now.
Yeah, I just comment that at least the Dragonfly community will not get a lot of support from GBIF, because they do not have a portal for that. They have no service around. They want to combine their data with other data sets which are available, for example, satellite data. My experience with GBIF is that the data set is very helpful, but it's also easy. I mean, when you do something with GBIF, it's very, very distributed infrastructure. It's quite slow. You need basically to get a dump of all GBIF data in a central environment to work with it somehow in a responsive way. So when you want to wait one day, maybe, yes, it's possible. So I would say that we are more open to in comparison to GBIF. So we are not only restricted or limited to biodiversity, but we want to be open to integrate also data sets which are not so common in GBIF, like raster data, maybe also gene biology data, which is also a very important driver of biodiversity. And bringing that all together, it's quite a challenge. But we would not like to say, well, forget now. We are not cooperating with GBIF. The opposite is true. So we want not to be an isolated infrastructure building here in Germany. So we need strong connection to GBIF. So, for example, to have this load or this bulk load once in our system would be very helpful, so that we can operate on the GBIF data in our system by itself. So you can do a great analysis then and get responsiveness to the user. And the same is true for the European Science Cloud. It's the same. Yeah? So we want not to develop something which is a parallel development of the European Science Cloud, but we want to integrate it. So we not only have a very cool infrastructure, but open enough to cooperate with others.
Okay, there's two hands raised. First one was by Peter Kraus and second one by Michael Dieckmann.
Yes, thank you. So I wonder, when you talk about how the data sets that you want to share, this is basically you expect them to just be like a binary blob storage thing, right? You just write your data and there it is. However, for my discipline or for the chemistry discipline, it might sometimes be necessary that you actually have a different way to access your data. And in addition, you mostly need, I don't know, some other technical stuff like, you want notify events and when files change and things like that. Do you plan on having something like a, I don't know, file system layer, the POSIX layer or something like that? Or is there a staging process planned for this?
First question, there's a staging layer. So no POSIX. We have the same problem actually in the genomics community, where everything expects a POSIX file system underlying. So there's this requires staging or rewriting of tools, but there's a staging component somewhere in the backlog that has to be implemented at some point when I have time for it. So yes, you would need to do staging. The other point is the question with changing of files, changing of data sets. Yes, that's something that we want to tackle, and that's like rather on a short notice on our timeline, simply because what we want to do is basically not changing files, so you can't technically change a file or an object inside the system. You every time you write a new object. That's just how the underlying object storage works. So it's everything is common, right? And basically, if there's a new version of this object, you can be notified on different levels. So if there's a new version release of the data set, you will be notified if you want to. If there's changes on the data sets, you can be notified. If there are changes on specific objects, you can be notified.
Okay, so and the same is true for writing, I suppose, because we also have like a lot of devices writing data. So OIDC authentication is not necessarily the right thing for us. There is no browser. There is no, I don't know, we would probably have to have some kind of other workflow that's non-interactive. And I'm not sure if we want to put tokens everywhere and then, when they leak, it's a problem.
Yes, I agree. There is an API, so there's a separate authentication mechanism that's in the cloud storage currently, but there are other options where you can basically use either prepared links that can be automatically generated, and the whole authentication process can be run via API tokens that you can generate.
Okay.
So no changing around of tokens, but you can create scoped API tokens that you can give your machine, and then your machine can actually authenticate with that token to the system.
Yeah, okay, and you somehow check the authenticity of this machine. I don't know, you can have some certificate, public key, whatever thing. Okay, but then I have one more question. Wait, what was it? Sorry, it slipped my mind. Maybe what were we just talking about? Authentication. Yeah, right. Authentication. The ID mapping. We always have these collisions of IDs and stuff. Did you already figure out a way how you, I don't know, when you have several entities all use different IDs for their users, and some have very complicated ones, but in the end, you just want to have them available on a Linux system and there is just an int. Did you already think about these problems? I mean, I get it. It's super technical and stuff. That's why it's my last question.
That's okay. I'm also a technical person.
Okay.
So yes, we have thought about that. There are multiple ways to tackle this. I'm not sure on which level you are thinking. So every object has a unique identifier within the system and can have optional identifiers in different systems. So if you have like, if you want to do DOI, you can assign a DOI to an object or to a data set without any problem. And then if you want to represent it in the, like in the Linux file system, you can use naming. So basically all the objects have names, and then you can use them to display them in the Linux file system. With regards to the authentication problem, no. That's something that is like, basically you can configure or that's the idea. You have to configure the staging stuff correctly so that the stage data has the right access rights that you want to have them.
Okay. So there is no. Yeah, sure. I just wonder if you already have some kind of, tool helping me to do exactly that. But no, that's already, Eddie, already pretty fine for since we all have the same problem after all, and we are probably implementing something similar at some point. It's always good to know that, we probably can. We don't have to do everything alone, so that's pretty good.
That was one of the reasons why I wanted to
for cross-cutting
early point
topic.
Yeah.
That's why it's called a cross-cutting topic. Yeah, exactly.
that is always true, but
and time is
a lot of.
Okay, we have some more questions. So maybe I would like to have a little comment, and then I hand over to the next question. And the comment is about assigning for example, other PIDs or DOIs. Now, of course, the question is whether you just have a metadata set, a field where you fill in the DOI or whatever your PID is, or whether you have some kind of linkage then that you create this new object as a kind of service during the processing. And this, of course, is a much more trickier thing. It's doable, of course, if you register your data with the portals and they give you DOIs for that, of course, it's doable, but this might be one of the questions for future rounds. I'd like to hand over to the next raised hand, which at the moment is from Hubert Zimmer.
Yeah, hello. Suppose I have half a petabyte of Dragonfly data, which is in format C. The data is stored on one of the German supercomputer centers for some reasons behind all the firewalls. And I have a script which converts format C into format North Rhine-Westphalia. How many hours, days, weeks would it take to integrate this script into the mediation layer? First question. And second question, how many days, weeks, or years would it take to convince the supercomputer center operators to make this reachable or integrated or set up the core storage with the API such that it can be integrated?
Awesome question, thank you.
Yeah, okay.
So let me comment on the first one, then maybe someone with more experience on the HPC side can comment on the second one. So it should be fairly easy. So basically the script itself has to be put in a Docker container, and then we will say, okay, the data that you want to convert will be put here, and the data, the converted data you have to put in this directory, and then we will load the data into our cloud storage again, and everything is fine. That's the current approach. There's also an alternative approach where we basically send out a byte stream on an HTTP link, but that's currently unexplored and it's difficult to implement actually properly. So basically we will do staging for you, then it's a Docker container that's run. And then after the Docker container is finished to run, the data will be downloaded and put back into our system or into the semantic layer, depending on what you wanted to do. And on the second question, maybe Michael?
Yeah, I think, Hubert, you addressed the most important question, so how do we get all these different institutions backing the NFDI consortia into the boat? And how can we computer centers and all these players involved to drive into a different direction? So mostly these institutes, they are behind a firewall, and they have the computers there running, and the limited circle of people can access the services. And so this involves a kind of a change of paradigm that is opening these institutions towards what we call zero trust. That means that's a multi-cloud surrounded not only by AI with respect to data and access to data, and all that Bernhard mentions this, but also to services and any code that is included, deployed within the multi-cloud needs to be checked, and anybody entering the scene needs to be checked. So this is something that is the major hurdle, and to convince institutions to change here what they've been doing for decades now is really difficult. But we have already with DEMBI, we have a running multi-cloud. So where different organizations, institutes have agreed on a common space, so to say. And we have candidates also outside of DEMBI, which are already interested in joining here with an own cloud instance conform to what we are heading for with the NFDI multi-cloud. So certainly this is on a different timeline. I would say that is as you said, Hubert, this is might take years, you know. So, but Marius also sketched out here a very cheap solution. So this edge solution, which allows then institutions to frame only part of the infrastructure into the multi-cloud without large investments, by just deploying some of the software needed, so that the data holdings, for example, could be replicated on demand there, like was what we conceived with the proxies. And I think that would be a solution that could also serve as a kind of entry card, you know. So when this is running, I think then we might also get more investments of all the connected institutions into this. But I think it's a logical development, and that adds to this what was mentioned about GBIF. GBIF is a very limited to biodiversity occurrences data, and this is really something that is cross-cutting, where we will be able to open up a common space for collaborative work and sharing all our data around complex applications. So with all the environmental data which are needed for many of our science domains, I think this will be the optimal solution. So there's no other way to go.
Just want to add one point. I don't see, I see basically these huge computing centers on the one hand side, but also I see the University of Marburg or University of Gießen and the research groups, the small research groups. We have to provide some infrastructure for these groups because they cannot afford to have a bunch of IT people running their databases or somehow. Even not our compute center is able to do that. And maybe there is in Göttingen the compute center. There are only very few, and there are many researchers in these smaller universities, and also not everybody is working in Helmholtz or in Jülich and cannot access this infrastructure properly. So we need some kind of new way to go, because this does not scale somehow, and doing research will require more and more data and also more and more cooperation. So this cooperative working with other disciplines and so on. This is something completely new that's getting more important for us in the future. That's my experience. But I tried to tell you that in previous times we were quite isolated. Now we are getting more in an interdisciplinary fashion, but in future we will go in a multidisciplinary research environments.
That was almost a very good, not almost, that was a very good closing word, by the way. There is one unanswered question from the chat, which I like to highlight, because this is an interesting question from my perspective too. And that is the question whether you foresee that the RDC, Federated Services, can also deal with highly sensitive data, as for instance, health data. And of course, you have additional requirements from DSGVO and the like.
Yes, I can elaborate.
A short answer, please.
Yeah, I try, although I promised Mr. Wünsch a longer answer. But yeah, so basically this is something we explore in FairDS. Yeah. In short, yes, but as you already mentioned, there are legal questions involved that we have to check. And also there are some additional not recommendations, but some additional components that need to be developed. So, for example, this is all based. This is all API based. So, if you want to load encrypted data into the system, the client that you use needs to encrypt the data at the point where it's like uploading the data, not at the API at the REST gateway. That's too late, in my opinion. Exactly. So, basically, we from perspective of a provider don't want to see any unencrypted personal data. That would be one thing that needs to be secured. The other thing is that, for example, the object storage endpoint wouldn't be publicly available, but it would only be available at the data center where you actually intend to analyze the data, while the non-personal person-specific metadata that basically describing the data set would be publicly available. So basically people could look for interesting data sets, for example, COVID-19 patient samples, and then they would see, okay, there's a COVID-19 patient sample from University of Berlin. And then they would see, okay, that's hosted there. And then I need to talk to that person and do this legal stuff in order to access the data set, because this legal requirements will always be there on personal data. And I think that's right, although sometimes a bit convoluted. It's just, we need this good protection of personal data. Otherwise, people wouldn't give that data to us probably. But in short, yes, it's possible. In theory, the design should accommodate for it. But in practice, we are currently investigating the options that we have in order to do that. And also, it's not a primary focus because my work is basically paid by NFDI for biodiversity. And so our focus currently is on non-health data. But if you're interested in that, I'm always happy and willing to collaborate on this. So just we can have a chat on that and see how we can go further with it if you are more closely interested.
Yeah, maybe I would encourage actually a bilateral talk, and maybe you share the outcome of the talk, because we're trying to think a bit bigger and a bit longer ahead.
Yes.
And of course, infrastructures in the long run will need to be able to deal with sensitive data, and in particular health data. Yeah. This is quite important.
Agreed. But that's maybe a good closing word from my side. If you're interested in collaborating on anything on this, so if you want to try this out for your NFDI, just contact me and we can discuss this. And also the Git, it's all public sourced on GitHub, so please, if you.
And also the design of the architecture. I mean, we have a broad architecture presented. We are happy to discuss on the architectural view, things which you think we should have to consider. It's very important at the early stage now to discuss it with us. When you have done something and you notice that on the lowest level you have made a flaw, you will not repair it anymore. So that's basically the time to redesign the entire stuff again. So we would not like to do it at least the next few years.
So thank you very much to the two speakers for being here. Thanks to the audience for being part of this InfraTalk.